guys, Olive here. In today's video, I want to give you some recommendations for books that follow a similar formula. If you are a seasoned BookTube viewer, then you likely have either heard of or have read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. But in case you haven't, let me give you a very quick synopsis. This is what's known as a campus novel. A young man gets the opportunity to study at an elite college in New England. Once he begins there, he gradually begins to be ushered into a very eccentric group of students who are all studying Greek under an exclusive and demanding professor. We are told immediately when we begin the book that one of the students in this group has died. So the book is showing us how we get to that point and then the inevitable aftermath. Now, I definitely had problems with aspects of this book, but what I really loved about it was the entire setup. The campus setting, the really tightly knit group of students, the mystery, but also the tone, the mood, the atmosphere of this book. It really sucks you into this world and doesn't want to let you go. I was so not done with the feel of this book that over the years, I both consciously and subconsciously have found myself picking up books that either closely resemble The Secret History or at least are reminiscent of The Secret History. I have found that there are a ton of books out there that have similar Secret History vibes to them, and I have read a ton of them. So I thought in this video I would tell you about 10 different books that have similarities to The Secret History. But before I get started talking about the books, I would like to very quickly define what I mean when I say The Secret History formula. To bear resemblance to The Secret History by Donna Tartt, books normally contain one or several of the following elements. Number 1, a campus setting, preferably saturated with academia and or pretension. Number 2, an eccentric, often self-destructive, tightly knit group of friends who likely have known each other forever. Number 3, an outsider who is invited into this group who will never quite belong regardless of how much he or she may want to or try to. Number 4, secrets, lots of them. Dark ones. Number 5, a heavy sense of atmosphere and mood that can go so far as to feel gothic. And finally, number 6, a tragic event or revelation that causes the group to question their loyalties to one another. So now let's talk about the books that may have one or more of these characteristics. I'm going to start with the books that I personally feel have the most in common with The Secret History and move on to the ones that I feel like have the least in common. The book I feel is the most similar to The Secret History is The Likeness by Donna Tartt. This is the second book in the Dublin Murder Squad series, which is a series of literary thrillers that are very easily read out of order if you wanted to read this one first, which is in fact what I did. In this book, we follow Murder Squad detective Cassie Maddox, who previously worked as an undercover agent. In the middle of the night, Cassie gets a phone call asking her to urgently come to a murder scene for a very odd reason that she only finds out about when she gets there. It turns out that the girl who was murdered looks nearly identical to Cassie. And what's even weirder is that this girl had been using Cassie's old undercover identity and name as her name. To try to figure out who this girl is and what happened to her, Cassie slips back into her old undercover persona and moves in with the group of students that this dead girl was living with. This book is by far my favorite book in the Dublin Murder Squad series. I thought it was fantastically plotted and paced, and although it does bear a lot of similarities to The Secret History, it's a lot more rooted in the real world. These students live off campus, and we get a very realistic portrayal of their daily lives as students. This does come at the cost of missing out on that really thoroughly academic setting that The Secret History has, but I found that Donna Tartt was much more able to focus on the characters and the mystery since she was not so focused on building up that atmosphere, and I thought this book really benefited from that. The second Secret History-esque book that I would like to talk to you about is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. Where The Likeness excels at the mystery and the characterization, If We Were Villains really nails the atmosphere and the academic setting of The Secret History. It does have a very similar setup to Donna Tartt's classic, but these students, instead of studying Greek, are drama students focusing solely and completely on Shakespeare. Each member of this friend group is utterly obsessed with Shakespeare, so much so that they begin to lose themselves in it. One of them dangerously so. Criticisms I've heard of this book talk about just how much Shakespeare there is in this book. And there is. That is absolutely true. I personally did not find it to be excessive because I think it was necessary to include that much to show just how much these kids are wrapped up in his works. But I do recommend, if you want to experience this book, that you listen to it on audiobook. That way you can hear them quoting Shakespeare and get a feel for it, especially if you're like myself and are not very familiar with Shakespeare's works. I thought the mood of this book was deliciously dark and tense. I definitely got similar feelings that I got when I read The Secret History, but I feel that this one really excelled on pacing. The third book I'd like to talk about is Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. Marisha Pessl's debut novel was very much The Secret History, but in its awkward high school phase. The daughter of an eccentric political science professor, Blue has bounced from school to school as her father has changed jobs just about every year. Now approaching the end of her high school career, Blue starts attending a very elite school and attracts the attentions of a particular teacher around whom circles a very quirky, cliquey group of students called the Blue Bloods. This teacher encourages the group to accept Blue, but they only ever do so on a surface level, and when something tragic and mysterious happens to this teacher, the fault lines between all of the different relationships begin to show. This book is the most academic of all of my recommendations. Blue is beyond nerdy, and since she's been bounced from school to school and has been raised by her very eccentric, very intelligent father, she identifies more with him than she does her peers. So the outsider never really fitting in element is particularly strong in this one, but it is definitely not as dark in tone. It's a lot zippier and a lot more like Gilmore Girls with all the pop culture and academic references, since that is what has occupied Blue's life in the absence of stable friends or peer relationships. I also definitely think this is not the most well done book on this list, but in general, I'm not the biggest Marisha Pessl fan, but I will say it definitely got the job done when it came to scratching the itch for a good Secret History-esque novel. The next book reminiscent of The Secret History is The Year of the Gadfly by Jennifer Miller. This is another one with a high school setting as opposed to a college setting, and this is the one that I was most surprised by. This one is uniquely, to this formula anyway, divided between two time periods. In the present, we follow overachiever, wannabe journalist Iris as she attempts to uncover the secrets in the past of the new science teacher at her high school. We spend the other half of our time in the past when this science teacher was a student at this exact same high school, a period during which his brother mysteriously died. The group of friends that we follow and the friendship breaking tragic events are all in the past. The science teacher that we are focusing on in the present day was a part of that group when he was in high school. And this group of friends is a lot more like a group of unpopular misfits than they are in any other book on this list. Meanwhile, our main character in the present day, Iris, is more of a perky loner. As I said, this book was a real surprise for me, and I mean that in the best possible way. The book follows the same narrative path as The Secret History, despite being split between two time periods. In the past sections, we see the group getting closer and closer to this inevitable tragedy, and in the present, we see the main character Iris getting closer and closer to revealing the truth while also dealing with her own problems. But this book is not nearly as atmospheric as The Secret History, and all of the characters felt a lot more individualistic as opposed to a fused together unit that would need to be present in a pure Secret History clone. But that being said, the mystery and the characters in this book were really top notch. I enjoyed this one a lot more than I did Special Topics in Calamity Physics. The next two books I'll be talking about are the two I've read the most recently, beginning with The Lessons by Naomi Alderman. This book is probably the most generic and unmemorable of this list. In it, we follow basic white boy James, an Oxford student whose family has very high expectations for him. As is the case with most Secret History-esque novels, the main character of this book becomes almost magnetically attracted to this group of friends, at the center of which is the flamboyant but deeply damaged rich boy Mark Winters. Our main character James really seriously injures himself right at the beginning of his university career, which unfortunately sets him irreparably behind his peers in terms of academics, but also, by chance, gives him an in with the group he so admires. This book is only one of 2 novels on this list in which we get to see what the gang gets up to after they are done with university, which is very interesting, although it is not done very effectively in this book. It does have that prestigious Oxford feeling to it, and there is some really pretty writing in here, but unfortunately this is probably my least favorite on this list. And one that I just read last month, since I am always interested in reading campus novels during this time of year, is the Bellwether Revivals by Benjamin Wood. This is about Oscar, a nursing aide at an assisted living facility just outside of Cambridge. Originally an outsider, he is drawn into the academic and social world of Cambridge after he is by chance drawn into a church by the beautiful organ music being played by the talented Eden. Oscar starts dating Eden's sister Iris and becomes involved in Eden's seemingly crazy idea that he can cure people's physical ailments with his music. The very bare bones structure of The Secret History is there with this book, but once you start to get into it, you realize that this book is much more about mental illness and music than it is about a campus or a mystery. There is a group of students who have known each other forever surrounding Eden and Iris, but they may as well not have been there for as much as they contributed to the story. I do recommend this book, but not for its similarities to The Secret History. So this is a little bit of a weird one. Moving on down the list, the next book I would like to talk to you about is called Bradstreet Gate by Robin Kerman. This one is set at Harvard, where 3 different students and 1 visiting professor have their lives either shaken up or ruined by the death of a student outside of their circle. This one is very different than The Secret History because these 3 students could only loosely be called friends. They are all very different, although fairly equally awful humans. Alice is the child of immigrant parents filled with an unresolved rage. Georgia is a golden girl, the child of a famous photographer who unwisely enters an affair. And Charlie is a scholarship student who is deeply in love with who he thinks Georgia is, and also who has an ego the size of Harvard's campus. While this book lacks the group feeling that The Secret History has, it has some of the most memorable characters, not just on this list, but in all the books I've ever read. You will hate them, but they are enthralling. The mystery and the tension are the real strengths of this book, and this is the other book that shows the group beyond their college years, but it does so much more effectively than the lessons did. Next up, I'd like to talk about the one and only young adult book on this list, that is Beljar by Meg Wolitzer. Our main character in this book is a teenage girl named Jam, who was sent to an emotional therapy boarding school after her boyfriend has tragically died. At this boarding school, she is asked to join a secretive, by invite-only course with an eclectic group of students. Every year, the teacher of this course not only handpicks the students, but also the novel that the students will both study in depth and journal about. The novel that this teacher picks for Jam and company is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. But when Jam starts to read the book and then journal about it, she finds that as she is writing, she is literally transported to another world. She and the other students start to realize that this is happening to all of them as they journal. I do need to mention that there is a controversial twist to this book that a lot of people didn't like, although I really, really did. In this book, I also really liked the dynamics between all the students. They tended to break off into subgroups and kind of pair off into twos, which is a very realistic thing that people do. When it comes to comparisons with The Secret History, it does have that dark, gloomy tone and the looming figure of a teacher, but the comparisons kind of end there. The penultimate book on this list is a personal favorite book of mine that does bear some resemblance to The Secret History. That is An Uncommon Education by Elizabeth Purser. The first half of this book is a coming-of-age tale of Naomi, a very bright young girl who aspires to be a doctor, focusing on heart issues after witnessing her father have a heart attack when she is very young. Halfway through this book, we see Naomi take a big step toward that goal by attending Wellesley, where she is very quickly ushered into a Shakespeare society. But although this book also deals with Shakespeare, the vibe of this book couldn't be more different than If We Were Villains. If We Were Villains makes you feel like you're stepping into an Edgar Allan Poe story. It is that dark. Meanwhile, this book makes you feel like you're getting chummy with a bunch of theater nerds. Both are great, but very different. I loved the cozy academic vibe of this book, and I particularly liked the main character. A lot of Goodreads reviewers called her cold, but I have a sneaking suspicion she's a fellow Lady INTJ, which was really nice to see on the page. And the last book that I will be discussing in this video is Bittersweet by Miranda Beverly Whittemore. This one is the most distantly connected to The Secret History history, but does have academic beginnings when our main character Mabel meets her beautiful, wealthy roommate Ginevra at a prestigious East Coast college. The two start to build a rickety friendship, one that is at least good enough for Ginevra to invite Mabel to her family's summer compound in Vermont. Here, Mabel comes to realize that Ginevra's family has a ton of secrets bursting to come forward. I think what reminds me most of the secret history in this book is the gothic vibe, but also the very rich people with secrets thing. But unlike every other book on this list, this one definitely does not have an autumnal feeling to it. It's much better read in the summer, if you happen to be a seasonal reader like myself. So those were all of these secret history-esque books that I had to discuss in this video. I would love to hear from you down in the comment section below whether or not this is a formula that resonates with you, if you've read any of these books, or if you've enjoyed them, or if there are any books that have this similar formula that I did not mention. I obviously really like this style of book, so I'm always looking for good recommendations. As I said, you can contact me down in the comment section below, or if you want to chat somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video. Bye.